Dawn broke pale over frozen Montana hills, the sky iron blue and unforgiving. The church bell clanged sharp, echoing across the valley where breath hung thick as wool. Frost silvered the wooden steps. Boots scraped, horses stamped. Silas Pritchard stood on those steps, leather ledger open like a preacher holding scripture. He read debts aloud, sins made public. When he called Nell Crowder, $19.62, improvements insufficient, every head turned. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men looked away. Nell stood at the wagon's edge, shawl clutched tight, breadbasket heavy on her arm. Her face burned despite the cold. She held her father's recipe book against her ribs, the leather cover cracked and soft with age. Silas smiled, all teeth and winter cruelty. "Unless you'd prefer alternate arrangements, Mrs. Crowder?" At the crowd's edge, a tall figure watched. Gideon Thorne, mountain man, face shadowed by his hat brim. His gloved hand rested on a rolled bundle of papers tied with red string. The wagon rattled over frozen ruts, each jolt driving splinters of cold through Nell's bones. She didn't look back at the town, couldn't bear to see who watched her leave. The mule plodded steady, breath clouding white. Wind cut through the valley, carrying the smell of pine smoke and distance. A hawk circled overhead, silent as judgment. Two homesteaders passed going the opposite direction. The wife crossed to the far side of the road. Her husband tipped his hat but kept his eyes on the reins. Nell's hands ached around the leather straps. The breadbasket sat beside her, still full. No one had wanted her charity. The cabin appeared small against the white valley, a dark speck swallowed by vastness. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, wasn't. She unhitched the mule with numb fingers, speaking soft nonsense to the animal. "There now. Easy. Long day for both of us." The mule's hide was warm under her palm. She pressed her forehead against its neck for a moment, breathing in the smell of hay and sweat and something alive. When she turned toward the cabin, she saw it. A notice nailed to her door, fluttering like a white flag of surrender. She crossed the yard slow, boots crunching frost, pulled the paper free, Silas's handwriting, neat as a ledger line. Improvement inspection, February 15th, 1876, Territorial Land Office. Signed, S. Pritchard, Clerk. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to prove she'd made sufficient improvements or lose everything. She crumpled the notice, then smoothed it flat again. Couldn't afford to ignore official documents. Inside, she laid it on the table beside the lamp and stared at it until the words blurred. The lamp oil was low. Nell counted coins by its guttering light, $12.40. Not enough for firewood and flour both. Winter had 2 months left, maybe 3 if the mountains held snow. She opened her father's recipe ledger, the spine cracking soft. His handwriting steadied her, even, careful, every letter formed like it mattered. Sourdough, 3 cups flour, 1 cup starter, need 12 minutes. Her finger traced the margin notes he'd scrawled between instructions. Dates, mostly. Weather observations. Then she saw it. 1864, Crowder Creek Survey. Need 12 minutes. Strange. Why note a survey in a recipe book? A sound outside made her freeze, scraping, footsteps. She grabbed the fireplace poker, heart hammering. The door was latched, but the latch was old iron and trussed. She eased to the window, peered through warped glass. Nothing but darkness and stars. Then she opened the door. A deer haunch hung from a rope on her porch rail, still bleeding slow into the snow. Fresh. The meat steamed faintly in the cold. Boot prints led away toward the tree line. A man's stride, long and purposeful. She squinted into the dusk and saw him, a tall figure on horseback, already half shadow, vanishing into the pines. No note, no explanation. She cut the meat down with shaking hands, carried it inside. The weight of it was real, solid, proof that someone had seen her, had thought her worth saving. But the tracks in the snow bothered her all night. Someone had been watching. Nell stood in the doorway long after the rider disappeared, the cold biting through her shawl. The deer haunch dripped slow red circles into the snow at her feet. She should bring it inside, should salt it, hang it proper. But her hands wouldn't move. 6 weeks until Silas came with his ledger and his measuring eyes. The mule shuffled in its lean-to, a soft, questioning sound. She'd have to feed it soon, though the hay was running thin. Everything was running thin. Flour, lamp oil, hope. She finally carried the meat inside and hung it from a rafter hook. Blood pattered into a tin basin she set underneath. The smell of iron filled the small space. Her stomach twisted with hunger and something else. Shame, maybe, that she needed this, that some stranger had seen her need written plain as debt on a church step. She stoked the stove with the last of the day's kindling and set a pot to boil. While water heated, she opened the recipe ledger again, studying that strange notation. 1864, Crowder Creek survey. Her father had filed the claim that year. She'd been a girl then, helping him mix mortar for the cabin foundation. He'd been so particular about the boundaries, walking them over and over with his surveyor's chain. Why write it in a recipe book? Outside, full dark had fallen. The wind picked up, rattling the window frame. Somewhere distant, a wolf sang lone and fading. Nell closed the book and pressed her palm flat against its cover. Tomorrow, she'd inventory what she had left. Tonight, she'd make stew from the gifted meat and try not to wonder who'd left it, or why. The general store smelled of kerosene and tobacco, leather, and something sour Nell couldn't name. She stepped inside, the bell over the door announcing her like a town crier. Conversation stopped. Two women at the fabric counter turned their backs. A ranch hand by the flour barrels found sudden interest in his boots. Silas Pritchard stood behind the counter that served double duty. Store on the left, land office on the right. A wooden partition separated them, but it was the same desk, the same man. He looked up from his ledger, smile thin as paper. "Mrs. Crowder, what can I do for you?" Nell's basket hung heavy on her arm. She'd brought 2 loaves of bread, hoping to trade. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Need flour. And lamp oil if you can spare it." "On credit, I assume." He didn't wait for her answer, just opened the store ledger and ran his finger down the page. "You're at $19.62. Store policy limits credit to $20. 38 cents a breathing room." "I brought bread," she said, setting the loaves on the counter. "Fresh this morning." He glanced at them, then back at her. "I don't barter in baked goods, Mrs. Crowder. Cash or credit." Behind her, someone snickered. Silas leaned forward, voice dropping to something almost kind. "Of course, there's the matter of your improvement inspection. February 15th. That's coming up quick." "I'm aware. Improvements mean infrastructure." He tapped the ledger with his pencil. "Buildings, equipment. That oven your husband built, those are quality stones. Soapstone holds heat better than anything." Her chest tightened. "The oven's not for sale." "Didn't say it was." His smile never reached his eyes. "Just noting what constitutes a proper homestead improvement. I'll need to assess everything when I come out." The bell chimed. Widow Kearney entered, her gray braid coiled tight, her face carved from harder wood than the store's shelves. She took one look at Nell and Silas and went still. Nell saw recognition flicker across the older woman's face. Something old and bitter. 2 pounds of flour," Nell said quietly. "On credit." Silas made a show of calculating. "That'll put you at $20.14. Over your limit, I'm afraid." "Then 1 pound." He measured it out slow, poured it into a paper sack. The pencil scratched in his ledger. $19.91. You're running out of rope, Mrs. Crowder." She took the flour without answering and left the loaves on the counter. Let him throw them away if he wanted. Outside, the cold air hit like a slap. She made it 3 steps before Widow Kearney caught her arm. "Wait." Nell stopped, blinking against the brightness of snow and sky. The widow's grip was iron, her voice low. "He took mine too, 5 years back. Said the oven was part of a state settlement when my husband died. Gave me $10 for stones worth 50. Nell's throat closed. "Don't let him in that cabin alone," Widow Kearney said. "Not for a second. You hear me?" She heard. Nell returned to the store an hour later, the handwritten affidavit folded in her pocket. She'd spent the time at the church, using Pastor Moss's desk to copy out her list of improvements in her best hand. Cabin chinked and weather-tight, root cellar dug and stocked, 15 acres cleared, fence line repaired, oven operational. It wasn't much, but it was true. Silas was alone now, the store empty in the late afternoon lull. He looked up when she entered, eyebrows rising. "Back so soon?" She laid the affidavit on the land office side of his desk. "My improvement report, for the inspection." He picked it up, read it slow. His smile returned, sharper this time. "This needs notarization." "I know. That'll be $2. She counted out the coins, her remaining cash dwindling. He took them, opened a drawer, and pulled out a heavy brass seal and a stick of red wax. The wax melted over a candle flame. He pressed the seal down with a satisfying thump, then signed his name below it. "There you are. All official." He slid the paper back to her. "Of course, I'll still need to verify everything during the inspection. Make sure it matches what you've claimed here." "That's fine." "Good." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You understand, Mrs. Crowder? I'm the only territorial notary within 60 miles. Every legal document in this valley flows through this desk. Deeds, contracts, Affidavits. The words landed like stones in still water. She understood now, saw it clear as the signature on the paper in her hands. He controlled the store. He controlled the land office. He controlled the legal seal that made documents binding. There was no way around him, no appeal, no other authority. "I'll see you February 15th, he said pleasantly. "Bring coffee if you have it. It's a cold ride out to your place." Through the window, she saw Pastor Moss walking past on the boardwalk. Their eyes met for a moment. He slowed, as if he might come in. Then he turned and kept walking. Nell folded the affidavit and left without another word, the brass seal's imprint burning through the paper like a brand. She stood on the boardwalk outside the store, the affidavit clutched in her hand. The sun was sinking fast, turning the snow to rose and gold, beautiful and cold and indifferent. A wagon rolled past, the driver nodding to her out of habit before his face shuddered with recognition. Another woman who owed Silas money, another name on a list. Nell looked down at the paper. The red wax seal gleamed like a drop of blood. She'd paid him to approve her own work, paid him for the privilege of proving she deserved to keep what was already hers, and in 6 weeks he'd ride out to her cabin and decide if it was enough. The same man who'd take her oven stones if she failed, the same man who was the only one who could say she'd succeeded. Her hands shook, but not from the cold. Morning came with the sound of a wagon creaking up the frozen trail. Nell was outside, hauling water from the creek when she heard it. She straightened, bucket in hand, and watched a tall figure drive a flatbed loaded with split wood into her yard. Gideon Thorne. He'd taken his hat off and she could see his face properly now, weathered but younger than she'd thought, maybe 42, gray eyes pale as winter sky. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down without hurry. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He gestured to the wood. "Figured you might need this. Saw your smoke yesterday. Chimney's drawing thin." She set the bucket down. Pride and need wrestled in her chest. "I can't pay for firewood. Didn't ask you to." He started unloading, stacking the split logs by her door with easy rhythm. "Thought we might trade. You cook, I hear. I've been eating my own jerky for 3 months. Tastes like boot leather." Despite everything, a smile ghosted across her face. "I can cook. Then we'll call it even." They worked in silence, Nell steadying the stack while Gideon unloaded. The wood smelled of pine and fresh resin. Her hands burned from the cold, but the work felt good, purposeful. When the wagon was empty, Gideon paused, looking toward her barn. The door hung crooked on its hinges. "You got something living in there besides the mule." Nell followed his gaze. "What?" "Tracks. Small. Someone's been sleeping in the hayloft." Her stomach dropped. She'd heard sounds at night, dismissed them as mice or wind. Gideon walked to the barn, Nell following. He pulled the door open slow. "Easy now," he called into the dimness. "We're not here to hurt you." A scuffling sound. Then a boy, bolted from the shadows, skinny, maybe 12, his coat too thin and his face hollow with hunger. Gideon caught him by the collar, gentle but firm. "Whoa, where are you running to?" The boy struggled, then went limp, panting. His eyes were wild with fear. Nell's heart cracked clean open. "Let him go," she said softly. Gideon released him. The boy stumbled back against the barn wall, ready to bolt again. "What's your name?" Nell asked. Silence. "You hungry?" The boy's throat worked. After a long moment, he nodded. "Come inside," Nell said. "I'll make breakfast." The cabin was warm, the stove radiating heat that turned the small space golden. Nell moved through the kitchen with the ease of long practice, slicing the deer meat thin, frying it in the last of her lard. She mixed cornmeal batter and poured it onto the griddle. The boy sat at the table, wary as a fox. Gideon sat across from him, not watching directly, just present. "Name's Tom," the boy said finally, voice rough with disuse. "Tom." Nell set a plate in front of him, meat, cornbread, the last of her preserves. "When'd you last eat?" He didn't answer, just fell on the food like he was drowning. Gideon ate slow, his eyes on Nell as she moved. She felt his gaze like a hand on her shoulder. Not intrusive, just there. "You got people, Tom?" she asked. The boy shook his head, mouth full. "Where you from?" "Helena. My ma died last fall. Fever. I've been working where I can." "Working or stealing?" Tom's face flushed, but he didn't lie. "Both." Nell poured coffee for Gideon, then herself. The steam rose between them, carrying the bittersweet smell of chicory. "You can stay," she said. Tom's head jerked up. "What? If you work? Chop wood, mend fence, help with the mule. I'll feed you and you can sleep in the barn till spring, then we'll see. The boy's eyes filled. He looked down fast, blinking hard. Gideon leaned back in his chair. You cook like this regular, you'll outlast winter fine. Nell almost laughed. Almost. Winter's not my problem, it's the inspection. Silas Pritchard. You know him? Everyone knows him. Gideon's jaw tightened. He doesn't own this valley, just acts like it. Nell fetched her father's recipe ledger from the shelf, opened it to the page that had been bothering her. Look at this. Gideon leaned close, studying the margin note. 1864, Crowder Creek Survey. Need 12 minutes. His finger traced the date. Your father filed the claim that year? Yes. This is surveyor's shorthand. He was marking the date for a reason. Gideon looked up, his eyes sharp now. You still have the original claim deed? In the trunk. Get it. She did. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. Gideon spread it beside the recipe book, comparing. Tom watched, forgotten plate scraped clean. Your father was careful, Gideon said slowly. Real careful. Why would he note the survey date in a recipe book, unless... He stopped. Unless what? Gideon stood. I need to ride to Helena, Territorial Archive. There's something I want to check. What? A hunch. He put his hat on, then paused at the door. Don't let Pritchard in this cabin without a witness, you hear me? She heard. After he left, Nell sat at the table with Tom, the cabin quiet except for the stove's crackle. The boy looked at her. You really mean it? I can stay? I mean it. For the first time since she'd come to this valley, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. But Gideon's warning echoed, don't let Pritchard in without a witness. 10 days passed. Tom settled into the rhythm of the place like he'd been born to it, chopping wood with determined strokes, mending the mule's harness with scraps of wire and leather, sitting quiet at meals like he was afraid the chair might disappear beneath him. Nell taught him to knead bread. His hands were small but strong. Gideon hadn't returned from Helena. The morning of February 1st came cold and clear. Nell was hanging laundry on the line when she heard hoofbeats, 2 horses coming fast. Sheriff Dalton rode up first, his badge catching the thin sunlight. Behind him came a younger deputy, barely 20, trying to look stern. Nell's stomach clenched. She walked to meet them, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Crowder. The sheriff tipped his hat. He looked uncomfortable, like a man delivering news he didn't want to carry. Sheriff, got a notice for you. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Mr. Pritchard's moved your improvement inspection up. February 1st, that's today. The world tilted. It was scheduled for the 15th. Says here he's got territorial authority to adjust inspection dates as needed. Something about weather concerns. The sheriff's voice was flat, professional, apologetic underneath. He'll be here by noon. 2 weeks. She'd lost 2 weeks. On what grounds can he move it? Territorial Land Office regulations, ma'am. He's the clerk. It's within his power. The deputy shifted in his saddle, looking anywhere but at her face. Nell took the notice with numb fingers. The paper crackled in the cold. I'm sorry, Sheriff Dalton said quietly. Then he turned his horse and rode away, the deputy following like a shadow. Tom appeared at her elbow, his face white. Miss Nell? She read the notice twice. Official seal, Silas's signature, legal and binding as a noose. Go to town, she said. Find Widow Kearney. Tell her what's happened. What about you? I'll be here when Pritchard comes. Her voice was steadier than her hands. Go now. Tom ran for the mule. Nell went inside and stared at her cabin with new eyes. What did sufficient improvement even mean? The walls were chinked, the stove worked, the root cellar was dug deep and stocked with what little she had. But she'd planned 2 more weeks to paint the window frames, to rebuild the porch steps, to make everything look cared for instead of barely surviving. She lit every lamp, swept the floor until the boards gleamed, set her father's recipe book on the shelf where the light would catch it just so. At noon, Silas Pritchard rode into her yard. He wasn't alone. 2 men accompanied him. One she recognized as a ranch hand from town, the other a stranger with a surveyor's chain coiled over his shoulder. Silas dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. Mrs. Crowder, hope you got my notice. I got it. Good. Let's have a look, shall we? He walked toward the cabin like he owned it. Like he already did. Nell stepped in front of the door. I'd like Pastor Moss present, or the sheriff, as a witness. Silas smiled. This is official land office business, Mrs. Crowder. I don't need witnesses. But if it makes you feel better, I've brought Mr. Henderson here, he gestured to the ranch hand, to note my findings. The ranch hand wouldn't meet her eyes. Now, shall we? Silas moved past her into the cabin. She had no choice but to follow. He walked through slowly, running his hand along the walls, testing the stove door, peering into the root cellar. The stranger with the surveyor's chain stayed outside, measuring something Nell couldn't see. Cabin's adequate, Silas murmured, making notes in a small book. Stove functional, root cellar. Well, it's a hole in the ground, isn't it? He stopped at the shelf, picked up her father's recipe book, flipped through it like it was a feed catalog. Your father's? Yes. Sentimental value, I'm sure. He set it down, but his fingers lingered on the cover. Now, about the oven. Her blood went cold. They walked outside. The bread oven sat in its stone housing, the chimney she'd repaired last fall still standing, crooked but sound. Silas crouched beside it, examining the soapstone base. These are fine stones, very fine, worth more than the cabin, truth be told. They're not for sale. Didn't say they were. He stood, brushing his hands together. But Mrs. Crowder, I have to tell you, I've got concerns. What concerns? His face shifted into something almost sad, almost. There have been reports about your circumstances here. What circumstances? Men visiting your property at odd hours. He let that hang in the air. Tom Henderson saw that trapper, Thorne, coming and going, and there's a boy living in your barn, unchaperoned woman, strange men, a vagrant child. The words hit like fists. Gideon Thorne traded firewood for meals. Tom's an orphan I hired as a farmhand. I'm sure there's innocent explanations. Silas's voice was oil smooth. But you see my position. Territorial statute requires homesteaders to maintain moral character. It's not just about buildings, Mrs. Crowder. It's about fitness. The ranch hand shifted uncomfortably, staring at his boots. You're calling my character into question? I'm noting concerns that have been raised by citizens, good people who worry about a woman living alone in circumstances that might be irregular. Nell's vision tunneled. She saw it clear now, the trap he'd built. Legal pressure and moral accusation braided together until there was no way out. My improvement affidavit was notarized, yes, but an affidavit doesn't address moral fitness. That's a separate evaluation. He smiled again, gentle as a knife. Now, I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, Mrs. Crowder. I'm just noting that there are questions that will need to be answered before I can recommend your claim be approved. What do you want? There it was, the question hanging between them since the church steps. Silas looked at the oven, then back at her. I think we could settle this simply. You're in debt to my store. You're facing questions about your fitness as a homesteader. But if you were to sell me these oven stones, say $15, I could apply that to your debt, and I could note in my report that you've shown good faith in resolving financial obligations. That counts for something. $15 for stones worth $50. Worth is what someone's willing to pay, Mrs. Crowder. The surveyor came around the cabin, chain clinking. He said something low to Silas, who nodded. We'll need to verify your boundary markers as well, Silas said. Make sure everything's in order. I'll have my report filed by week's end. He mounted his horse. The other men followed. Think about my offer, he called as they rode out. It's a fair one, more than fair, considering your circumstances. Nell stood in the yard long after they disappeared, the cold seeping through her coat, her breath coming short and sharp. She should have stayed home, should have hidden, until the rage and shame burned themselves out. Instead, she hitched the mule and drove to town. The general store was crowded, Saturday afternoon, families stocking up for the week. Nell pushed through the door, the bell's chime cutting through the buzz of conversation. The buzz died. Every face turned toward her. Silas stood behind the counter, mid-transaction with a farmer. He looked up and something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or warning. Mrs. Crowder, he said loudly, pleasantly. Didn't expect to see you so soon. She walked to the counter, her footsteps loud on the plank floor. I need supplies. Of course, though I should mention, there's been some concern raised about your situation. You already mentioned your concerns this morning. Not mine, Mrs. Crowder. His voice carried to every corner of the store. Citizens' concerns, good people worried about propriety, a woman alone, entertaining men at odd hours. A woman near the fabric bolts gasped softly. Nell's face burned. I've done nothing improper. I'm sure you believe that. Silas leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost kind. Almost. But you have to understand how it looks. That trapper staying for meals, a vagrant boy living on your property, and now I hear you've been consorting with him in town. Walking together. People talk, Mrs. Crowder. We walked to the church. The appearance matters as much as the truth. He straightened, addressing the room now. Territorial statute is clear. Homesteaders must maintain moral character. It's not just my opinion, it's the law. The farmer at the counter took his goods and left quickly, not looking at Nell. A man near the door muttered something. Another laughed, low and ugly. Nell's hands shook. She pressed them flat against the counter to still them. Moral turpitude affects homestead eligibility, Silas continued. I'd hate to see you lose your claim over something like this. But if the questions persist, I'll have to note them in my official report. You understand? She understood. Understood that every word he spoke was calculated, that he was painting her as something she wasn't, in front of witnesses who would carry the story to every corner of the valley, that her denial would only make it worse. A woman whispered behind her, "Living out there alone? What did she expect?" Nell turned and walked out, her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Not here, not in front of them. The afternoon sun was too bright, the air too cold. She climbed onto the wagon, hands fumbling with the reins. A figure stepped in front of the mule, Widow Kearney, her face hard as flint. "Don't," she said. "Don't what? Don't run. Don't hide. Don't let him take your fight." The widow's hand shot out, gripping Nell's wrist. "That's how he wins. Shame you into quitting." You don't understand." "I understand exactly." Widow Kearney's eyes were fierce. "He did this to me. Called me unfit after my husband died. Said I was too old, too weak, morally questionable because I took in a hired man. I believed him. I quit." Her grip tightened. "Worst choice I ever made. Don't you make it too." Nell's throat closed. She wanted to say something. "Thank you," or "I can't," or "help me," but the words wouldn't come. Tom came running from the direction of the church, his thin legs pumping. "Miss Nell, Pastor Moss says to come quick. He wants to talk to you." The widow released her wrist. "Go. Listen to what he has to say." Nell drove the wagon to the church in a daze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Pastor Moss waited on the steps, his face grave. "Mrs. Crowder, I heard what happened in the store." "Everyone heard." "Yes." He gestured for her to follow him inside, away from the street. The church was empty, cold, smelling of old hymn books and dust. "Silas Pritchard came to me 3 days ago," the pastor said quietly. "Asked me to declare you incapacitated. Said you were showing signs of mental instability, living alone, talking to yourself, erratic behavior." Nell's stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "I refused." Pastor Moss's jaw tightened. "I told him I'd seen no such thing, that you were grieving, but sound. He wasn't happy." "So he's doing this instead?" "Yes." The pastor pulled a folded paper from his coat. "But Mrs. Crowder, I think you should see this. It came on the stage yesterday. From a bank in Helena." He handed it to her. It was a ledger page, official and stamped. A list of outstanding debts. Silas Pritchard's name was at the top. $800 owed, interest compounding monthly. "He's desperate," Pastor Moss said. "He needs money fast. That's why he's accelerating foreclosures. He takes the property, sells the equipment, pockets the difference." Nell stared at the numbers. $800. A fortune. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I can't stop him legally. He has the authority." "But morally," the pastor met her eyes. "If you could prove your worth publicly, show the community who you really are, I'd stand with you." "How?" "Host a gathering. Here at the church, feed people, let them see your competence, your character." His voice gentled. "I'll provide the platform. You provide the proof." Nell's hands trembled around the ledger page. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then at least you'll have tried." She looked at the paper, Silas's debts written in black ink, his desperation quantified. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the snow to fire. Tom waited by the wagon, loyal as a hound. Widow Kearney stood in the street, arms crossed, watching. Nell folded the ledger page and tucked it into her pocket. "When?" she asked. Pastor Moss smiled, grim but sure. "As soon as you're ready." Dawn came cold and clear. Nell woke with purpose burning in her chest. a hard, bright thing that felt like anger but tasted like hope. She dressed, braided her hair tight, and walked outside to where Tom was already splitting kindling. "We're mending the fence today," she said, "the stretch by the road." Tom looked up, confused. "But that fence is fine. We're mending it anyway, where people can see." Understanding dawned on his face. He grinned. "Yes, ma'am." They worked in full view of the main trail, hammers ringing against iron staples, wire singing taut between posts. The morning sun warmed Nell's back. Her hands blistered, but she didn't stop. A wagon passed, slowing. The driver stared. Nell lifted her hand in greeting, her wave deliberate and steady. The man nodded back, uncertain. Another wagon, then a rider on horseback. Each one got the same wave, the same level gaze. "Why we doing this?" Tom asked during a water break, his breath clouding white. "Because I've got nothing to hide." Nell hammered another staple home, the sound sharp as a declaration. "Let them look." By noon, the fence line stood straight and true. Nell's shoulders ached, her palms were raw, but something inside her had shifted, from defense to offense, from hiding to standing. The sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. Gideon Thorne rode up the trail, his black horse lathered with sweat. He'd been riding hard. His face was grim, but his eyes held something bright. "Need to show you something," he said, swinging down from the saddle. "Now." Inside the cabin, Gideon unrolled a large map across the table, weighing the corners with jars and cups. The paper was yellowed, official stamps in the corners. "Territorial survey," he said. 1864. Original boundaries. Nell leaned close, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. Tom pressed in beside her. Gideon's finger traced a line. "This is Crowder Creek. Your father's claim started here." His finger moved and extended to the second ridge. "Here." Nell compared it to her current deed, pulled from the trunk. The boundary on her deed stopped 40 acres short. "I don't understand." "Your land extends further than your deed shows." Gideon's voice was hard with controlled anger. 40 acres. And I checked the tax records. Silas Pritchard has been collecting territorial taxes on that land for 12 years. But it's not territorial land. It's yours. The room tilted. "He's been stealing from you," Gideon continued. "From everyone on this creek. Small amounts from each homesteader, but it adds up. He's been pocketing the difference." Nell pulled out her father's recipe ledger with shaking hands, opened it to the marked page. 1864, Crowder Creek Survey. Need 12 minutes. She laid it beside the map. The dates matched exactly. "He was recording it," she whispered. "My father, he knew the boundaries, wrote them in the one place he knew I'd keep." Tom leaned over the map, his eyes wide. That's fraud, isn't it? Federal fraud." "It is," Gideon straightened. "But proving it means going against a territorial land office clerk. His word against old maps and a recipe book." "Not just his word," Nell said slowly. "He'd need to explain why he's been collecting taxes on ghost land." They stared at the map in silence. The evidence spread before them like a hand of cards finally revealed. A knock at the door broke the moment. Widow Kearney stood on the threshold, Pastor Moss beside her. Behind them, 3 other women from town, the ones who'd whispered in the store. Nell's stomach clenched, but Pastor Moss smiled. "Mrs. Crowder, these ladies have something to say." The oldest woman stepped forward, her face flushed. "We heard what Silas said about you, and we wanted to say we're sorry for listening, for not speaking up." Another woman nodded. "My husband lost our claim 2 years back. Same way. Silas found reasons. We never thought we'd like to help," the third said quietly. "With the gathering, if you'll have us." Nell couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. Widow Kearney smiled, fierce and proud. "Told you. Fight back loud enough. People listen." Pastor Moss set a basket on the table. Flour, sugar, salt. "For the bread. The church will provide the rest. We'll host it next Sunday, after service." Gideon caught Nell's eye across the room. His nod was small but certain. She found her voice. "Sunday, then." After they left, Nell stood at the window, watching them walk back down the trail together. Tom was already counting jars in the root cellar, making lists. Gideon rolled the map carefully, securing it with string. "Silas will try to stop this," he said. "I know. Tom should watch the oven. Make sure he doesn't sabotage it before Sunday." Tom appeared in the doorway. "I'll sleep out there if I have to." Nell looked at them both. This trapper who'd brought her evidence, this boy who'd found a home, her allies, her family. Then we'd better start baking, she said. The rumors started on Wednesday. Nell heard them at the mercantile, whispered loud enough to carry. Poor thing's losing her mind. Living alone does that. At the feed store, saw her talking to herself by the fence line, just muttering away. In the street, my cousin said she's been erratic, forgot what day it was, asked the same question twice. Each lie was small, plausible, poisonous. By Thursday, the store clerk avoided her eyes when she came in for lamp oil. He counted her change twice, like he wasn't sure she could follow the math. "Are you feeling well, Mrs. Crowder?" he asked, voice dripping with false concern. "I'm fine. It's just, folks worry about you, out there alone." She paid and left, her hands steady despite the rage. Outside, two women stood near the dress shop. Their conversation stopped when Nell passed. One of them clutched her handbag tighter like madness might be catching. Nell walked to the church, each step measured. She would not run, would not hide. Pastor Moss was sweeping the steps. He looked up, saw her face, and set the broom aside. "He's saying you're unstable." "I know. It's working. People are talking." "Let them." The pastor studied her. "You're not afraid?" "I'm terrified." Nell's voice shook, but she held his gaze. "But I'm done running from lies." He nodded slowly. "Then we stand together, Sunday, no matter what he does." A buggy rattled past. Pastor Moss waited by his side, silent and solid. "Walk with me," he said finally. "Let them see us." They walked the length of Main Street together, the pastor and the woman Silas had called unfit. Nell kept her head high, her steps even. People stared, some whispered, but no one could say she was hiding. When they reached the far end of town, Pastor Moss stopped. "Mrs. Crowder, there's something else you should know." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, the same ledger page he'd shown her before, Silas's debts written in black ink. "This came from a bank officer in Helena, a friend of mine. He shouldn't have sent it, technically, but he thought someone should know." "Why are you showing me again?" "Because I want you to understand what you're up against." His finger tapped the total. $800. Silas is desperate. Men do terrible things when they're desperate. Nell stared at the number. He needs land sales to cover it. He needs them fast. The bank's calling the debt in 3 months. Pastor Moss folded the paper carefully. "That's why he's pushing. That's why he's destroying reputations. Every homestead he forecloses on, every piece of equipment he seizes, it buys him time." "How many has he taken?" 7 families in 2 years, maybe more." 7 families, 7 lives uprooted. Nell thought of Widow Kearney's bitter face. He took mine too. "What if I prove him wrong?" she asked. "What if Sunday works? What if people see I'm fit and capable?" "Then you save your claim." Pastor Moss met her eyes. "But you won't save the others, not unless you expose what he's doing." The weight of it settled on her shoulders. Not just her fight, but theirs, all of them. "The map Gideon found," she said slowly. "The tax fraud, that's federal." "It is. If we could prove it publicly, we'd need more than old maps and margin notes." The pastor's voice was gentle but firm. "We'd need witnesses, records, something undeniable." Nell's mind raced. The recipe ledger, the survey map, the tax records Gideon mentioned, and something else. Something obvious she'd been too frightened to see. "He keeps ledgers," she said. "At the store, both sides of the desk, store accounts and land office records, all in one place." Pastor Moss's eyes sharpened. "You think he's recorded the fraud?" "I think men like Silas keep records of everything. It's how they stay in control." Nell's voice grew steadier. "And if his handwriting's in those ledgers, showing taxes collected on land that doesn't exist, that would be undeniable." They stood in silence, the implications spreading between them like ripples. "I can't get those ledgers," Nell said. "No, you can't. But if someone else—" "Mrs. Crowder," Pastor Moss's voice carried warning. "I'm a man of God. I can't condone theft." "I'm not asking you to." He studied her for a long moment, then, very quietly, "But I can tell you that Silas closes the store Sundays, for church, and he never misses service. Thinks it's good for his reputation." Nell's heart hammered. "I wouldn't know what to do with that information." Neither would I. The pastor smiled, sad and knowing. But if someone happened to find evidence of fraud while you were hosting your gathering, well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. That evening, Gideon came to the cabin with a plan. Sunday, he said, spreading the survey map on the table again. While you're at the church feeding people, I'll be at the store. That's breaking and entering. That's recovering stolen property. His jaw was set. Those tax records prove he's been stealing from every homesteader on this creek. That's not his property. It's evidence. Nell's hands trembled. If you're caught, I won't be. Everyone will be at the church, including Silas. Gideon's eyes were hard. He'll want to watch you, want to see if you pull it off. His pride won't let him miss it. Tom sat in the corner listening. I could help. Keep watch. No. Both adults spoke at once. You stay with Nell, Gideon said. Guard the oven. That's your job. Tom's face fell, but he nodded. Nell looked at the map, then at Gideon. This could destroy you if it goes wrong. It could destroy you if we don't try. His voice softened. You've been fighting alone long enough. Let someone fight with you. The words hit her chest like stones in still water. She'd been alone so long she'd forgotten what alliance felt like, what trust meant. All right, she whispered. Gideon reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, brief and warm. We'll get him, Nell, all of us together. After he left, Nell sat with her father's recipe ledger open in her lap. She traced his handwriting, the careful notes between instructions. He'd hidden the truth for her to find. Had trusted she'd be smart enough, strong enough to use it. Outside, Tom was already bedding down by the oven, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Keeping watch, she closed the book and pressed it to her chest. Sunday was 3 days away, 3 days to practice recipes, to prepare herself, to build the courage for what came next. She lit every lamp in the cabin, driving back the dark. Then she began to bake. Friday night, Nell sat alone at the table, the cabin dark except for a single lamp. Her father's apron lay across her lap, worn calico, stained with years of flour and grease and memory. She'd been crying, didn't remember starting. The voice came from the past, sharp as a slap. You kept him soft. A man needs a hard woman out here, not someone who bakes and babies. Her husband's sister, standing in this very cabin 3 days after the funeral, blaming Nell for the logging accident that had taken him, as if love and bread had made him weak, as if being tender was a sin. You're too much, Nell, too soft, too slow, too much. She pressed the apron to her face, breathing in the ghost of yeast and wood smoke. Maybe they were right. Maybe she should sell the stones to Silas, take what she could, and leave. Find a city where being large and alone didn't mark her as wrong, where she could disappear into crowds instead of being measured against mountains. The clock ticked loud in the silence. Sunday was 2 days away. 2 days to feed 40 people and prove she deserved to exist in this place, to stand in front of the congregation and offer them bread while Silas watched with his ledger and his lies. What if she failed? What if they ate her food and still called her unfit? The lamp guttered. She should add oil. Couldn't make herself move. A knock at the door, sharp and demanding. Nell jerked upright, wiping her face. Who is it? Open this door right now. Widow Kearney. Nell unlatched it. The widow pushed inside, took one look at Nell's tear-streaked face, and set a coffee pot down on the table with a bang. Don't you dare. Don't what? Don't quit. I can see it on your face. The widow's eyes were fierce. You're thinking about running, about giving up, about letting him win. You're scared. I know. I was too. Widow Kearney poured coffee into 2 cups, the smell bitter and grounding. 5 years ago, I sat in my cabin just like this, cried just like that, and then I signed the paper that gave Silas my oven. She pushed a cup toward Nell. Worst choice I ever made. Not because of the oven, because I believed him when he said I wasn't enough. The widow's voice cracked. I let him tell me what I was worth, and I've regretted it every day since. Nell's throat was too tight to speak. You fight, Nell Crowder. You fight with everything you have. Even if you lose, especially if you lose, you fight. The widow gripped her hand. Because that's the only way you get to keep yourself. They sat in silence, drinking coffee that tasted like tar and grace. Finally, Nell found her voice. What if I'm not strong enough? You hauled water all winter. You fed a stranger and took in an orphan. You're still standing after everything he's thrown at you. Widow Kearney's smile was hard. You're stronger than you know. You just need to believe it. After she left, Nell sat with the apron in her lap for a long time. Then she stood, folded the apron carefully, and began to work. Saturday morning, the cabin became a factory of bread and purpose. Nell kneaded dough until her arms ached, the rhythm hypnotic and steadying. Pastor Moss had brought more flour. The church ladies had contributed lard and salt. There was enough now, enough to feed everyone. Widow Kearney arrived at dawn, rolled up her sleeves, and started on stew. "Venison," she said. "Gideon dropped off a whole deer yesterday, said you'd need it." Tom hauled water until the barrels were full, then helped cut vegetables with fierce concentration. The cabin smelled of yeast and wood smoke, onions and hope. Gideon came by noon, checking the plan one last time. "I'll go in through the back window," he said quietly, away from Tom's ears. "The lock's broken, saw it last week. I'll find the ledgers, get what we need, and be gone before anyone knows." "What if someone sees you?" "They won't. Everyone will be at the church, watching you." His eyes held hers. "That's the point. You're the distraction, the real show." Nell swallowed hard. "No pressure." He almost smiled. "You'll be fine. Just cook like you always do." She pulled her father's recipe ledger from the shelf, tucked it carefully into her apron pocket. Evidence and heirloom, both. "Smart," Gideon tapped the pocket. "Those dates in the margins, that's your proof the boundaries are wrong. Combined with the tax ledgers I'll find, we'll have him." Pastor Moss arrived with a wagon to transport the oven stones to the churchyard. They loaded them carefully, each piece wrapped in burlap. "Tom," Nell said, "you'll sleep by the oven tonight. Make sure nothing happens to it." The boy nodded, his face serious. "I won't let anyone near it. Promise." By evening, everything was ready. 6 loaves of dough rising under cloth, stew simmering in the big pot, the oven stones transported and reassembled in the churchyard, ready to be lit at dawn. Nell stood in her cabin doorway, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was gold and rose, beautiful and cold. Tomorrow she would light the oven, the first time since her husband died. Would bake bread for people who'd whispered about her, would stand before Silas Pritchard and dare him to call her unfit. And while she did, Gideon would break into the store and steal evidence that could destroy them all if it went wrong. Her hands shook. She pressed them flat against her skirts. Tom appeared at her elbow. "You scared, Miss Nell?" "Yes." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "But I'm glad I'm here, with you." Something in Nell's chest loosened. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Me too, Tom." Behind them, the cabin glowed warm with lamplight. Ahead, the church steeple stood black against the dying light. Tomorrow would be a reckoning. Tonight, she rested. Sunday morning broke clear and bright, the air sharp with cold that promised spring underneath. Nell lit the bread oven as the sun rose, kindling, crackling to life inside the stone chamber. Tom had kept faithful watch all night, wrapped in blankets, his small form curled against the base like a guardian. "Nothing happened," he reported, yawning. "No one came near it." The oven stones took an hour to heat properly, glowing red-orange in their ancient way. Nell's hands remembered the rhythm, her father teaching her, then her husband building this very oven, his hands careful on every stone. She slid the first loaves inside with the long wooden paddle. The smell of baking bread rose immediate and glorious, carried by the morning wind across the churchyard. People began arriving. First the church ladies who'd helped prepare, then families in Sunday clothes, then curious townspeople drawn by the smell. They gathered in clusters, watching Nell work, their faces uncertain. Widow Kearney moved through the crowd with a coffee pot, pouring cups, talking low and steady. Pastor Moss greeted people at the church door, his presence official and calming. By the time the bell rang for service, 40 people had gathered. Silas Pritchard rode up just as the first loaves came out of the oven, golden and perfect. He dismounted, brushing dust from his coat, his eyes scanning the crowd with proprietor's satisfaction. He saw Nell and smiled. She didn't smile back, just kept working, hands steady as she laid loaves on the serving table. Service lasted an hour. Nell heard the hymns from outside, the rise and fall of Pastor Moss's voice carrying through the open windows. She kept baking, kept stirring the stew, kept moving. When the congregation emerged, blinking in the bright noon sun, the smell of food hit them like welcome. "Please," Pastor Moss announced. "Mrs. Crowder has prepared a meal for us. Let us share in fellowship and gratitude." People moved forward slowly, still uncertain, but hunger and curiosity won. The first woman took a bowl of stew, tasted it, and her eyes widened. "It's good," she said, surprised. Others followed. Nell served them all, slicing bread with steady hands, ladling stew, meeting every eye. No shame now, no hiding. Children crowded close, drawn by the smell. She gave them the heel crust, still warm, and watched them eat with the ferocity of young things. Silas stood at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, watching. Nell felt his gaze like pressure, ignored it. The crowd began to talk, the tension easing as bellies filled. Someone laughed. A child chased another around the church steps. The rigid Sunday quiet softened into something warmer. Tom helped distribute food, his face serious with responsibility. Then Nell saw it, a rider approaching fast from town, Gideon on his black horse, saddlebags bulging. Her heart stopped. He dismounted at the edge of the crowd, caught her eye, and nodded once. He'd done it. Had the ledgers. Pastor Moss saw too. He moved to Gideon, spoke quietly, then called out, "Friends, if I might have your attention." The crowd quieted, turning toward the church steps. "Mrs. Crowder has blessed us with this meal," the pastor continued. "But there's something else that needs to be shared. Evidence of wrongdoing that affects us all." Silas straightened, his face hardening. "Pastor, this is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time." Gideon stepped forward, pulling papers from his saddlebag. Territorial Land Office records, showing taxes collected on boundaries that don't exist. He spread a map on the serving table. The crowd pressed closer. "This is the 1864 survey, original territorial boundaries." His finger traced lines. "And these are the current deeds. Notice anything?" Murmurs, confusion, then understanding rippling through the gathering like wind through grass. "Every homestead on Crowder Creek, Viesum," Gideon said clearly, "has been taxed on 40 acres more than their deeds show. For 12 years, those taxes were collected by the land office and never remitted to the territorial government." A farmer pushed forward. "That's my land. I've been paying. We all have." Another man interrupted. "Jesus, we've all been paying." Silas's face drained white. "That map is outdated. Superseded by what?" Nell stepped forward, pulling her father's recipe ledger from her apron. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "By this?" She opened it to the marked page. "My father's notes. 1864. Crowder Creek Survey, written the day the boundaries were set." She held it up so everyone could see. "The same boundaries shown on that map." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Those dates match," someone said. "Look, it's the same year." "This is absurd," Silas sputtered. "A recipe book isn't legal evidence, but these are." Gideon pulled more papers from his bag. Ledger pages, carefully copied, Silas's handwriting clear on every line. "Tax collections, from your own land office records, showing payments received for parcels that don't exist in the territorial registry." He spread them across the table. The crowd pressed closer, reading over each other's shoulders. Widow Kearney's voice rang out. "He did this to me, told me I owed back taxes, made me sell my oven to cover them." Another voice. "And me, said I was short on my claim, cost me everything." The crowd's murmur turned ugly. Silas backed toward his horse. "This is slander, theft of private documents, documents proving fraud." Pastor Moss stepped between Silas and his escape route. "Federal fraud, theft from the territorial government, from your neighbors. I'll have you arrested for breaking into my store." "You'll have to prove I did." Gideon's smile was cold. "And you'll have to explain these ledgers to a federal land agent." "Who's coming here?" Pastor Moss added quietly. "I sent for him 3 days ago. He arrives tomorrow." Silas's face went from white to gray. He looked at the crowd, their faces hard now, angry, betrayed, looked at the evidence spread across the table, looked at Nell, standing with her father's book in her hands. "You did this," he said, voice shaking. "You and your—" "I fed these people," Nell interrupted. "That's all. Fed them and told the truth." The crowd shifted. Someone spat on the ground near Silas's boots. He stumbled backward, fumbling for his horse's reins. "This isn't over." "It is." Sheriff Dalton stepped out of the church, where he'd apparently been listening. "Mr. Pritchard, I'm placing you under territorial custody pending the land agent's arrival. You'll answer questions about these records." "You have no authority." "I have enough." The sheriff's hand rested on his gun belt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." For a long moment, Silas stood frozen. Then he mounted his horse and spurred it hard, galloping toward town. The sheriff watched him go. "He won't get far. Roads are watched." Nell's knees went weak. She gripped the table's edge. Tom appeared at her side, steadying her. Widow Kearney took her other arm. The crowd erupted in talk, angry, amazed, vindicated. People clustered around the map and ledgers, pointing, calculating how much they'd been cheated. Gideon caught Nell's eye across the chaos and tipped his hat. Pastor Moss raised his hands. Friends, let us remember, justice is served, but vengeance belongs to the Lord. Mrs. Crowder has been wronged along with all of us. I propose we make this right. How? Someone called. By witnessing. When the federal agent arrives, we'll all testify, together. He looked at Nell. And we'll make sure her claim, and all our claims, are honored properly. A cheer went up, rough, heartfelt, loud enough to scatter the crows from the church roof. Nell stood in the center of it, breadbasket in her arms, her father's book tucked safe in her pocket. She'd survived winter. She'd fed them, she'd told the truth, and it had been enough. The bread was gone by sunset, every loaf, every bowl of stew, consumed by people who stayed long past propriety, talking, laughing, calculating their losses and their gains. Nell sat on the church steps, exhausted, while Tom collected empty bowls and Widow Kearney supervised cleanup with the efficiency of a general. Sheriff Dalton approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Crowder, wanted you to know, we caught Pritchard at the Helena Road. He's in custody. Thank you. Federal agents coming tomorrow, like the pastor said. You'll need to give testimony. About the boundaries, the taxes, all of it. He shifted his weight. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Should have seen what he was doing sooner. You're seeing it now. He nodded and walked away. People came to her one by one as the light faded, thanking her, apologizing, pressing her hand. The women who'd whispered in the store, the men who'd looked away. They came, and she received them with quiet grace. As the crowd thinned, Gideon approached, leading his horse. He looked tired but satisfied. You did good, he said. We did. The land agent will want to see the original survey records. I can ride to Helena again, if needed. I'd appreciate that. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Finally, Gideon cleared his throat. Got a question for you, Nell. Her heart jumped. All right. That 40 acres, the extra land that's rightfully yours. He turned his hat in his hands. You're going to need help working it, and I'm tired of trapping alone. She studied his face. Weathered, honest, careful. What are you proposing? Partnership, not marriage, unless you want that someday, but no pressure. Just splitting the work, splitting the profit, building something together. He met her eyes. Fair terms, equal partners. Nell's throat tightened. That's a generous offer. It's a practical one. You need help. I need a home. Seems like we could make something good out of that. He paused. If you're willing. She thought about the winter that had passed, the loneliness, the fear, the slowly built alliance between her and this quiet man who'd brought evidence when she needed it most. Fair terms, she said finally. Equal partners. His smile was small but real. All right then. Tom ran up, breathless. Miss Nell, Pastor says, can I stay with you permanent, like family? She looked down at his hopeful face. This boy who'd stolen from her and then guarded her oven through the night. You're already family, Tom. He whooped and ran off to tell someone, anyone, the news. Gideon held out his hand. Nell shook it, his calluses rough against hers. Spring's coming, he said. We'll plant together. The federal land agent arrived Monday, spent 3 days reviewing maps and ledgers and listening to testimony from every homesteader on Crowder Creek. Silas Pritchard's debts were discovered, along with evidence of 5 other homesteads seized through fraud. Charges were filed. He'd face trial in Helena. Nell's claim was certified with the correct boundaries. 40 acres returned to her deed, along with refunds for 12 years of fraudulent taxes. She used the money to buy seeds for spring planting. The oven stones were loaded back onto a wagon and returned to her cabin, where they belonged. Tom helped her rebuild the base, carefully placing each stone like it mattered, because it did. Widow Kearney came by often, teaching Nell how to cure ham and smoke fish for the coming year. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd survived different winters but understood the same cold. Gideon built a small cabin on the far edge of the property, separate but close. Partnership, he'd said, not presumption. By April, the valley was greening. Crocuses pushed through the last patches of snow. The creek ran high with snowmelt singing over stones. They planted together, Nell, Gideon, Tom, turning soil that was finally, legally, undisputedly, hers. Pastor Moss made the monthly bread breaking a permanent tradition. First Sunday of every month, families gathered at the church. Nell baked, others brought what they could. They ate together, shared news, built the kind of community that doesn't come from blood, but from choice. One evening in May, Nell stood at her cabin door watching the sunset. Tom was in the barn, singing tunelessly while he fed the mule. Gideon was checking fence posts on the northern boundary, his figure small against the vast mountains. Her father's recipe book sat on the kitchen shelf, its pages no longer needed every day. She'd memorized most of the recipes now, but she kept it close anyway, evidence and heirloom both, proof that sometimes the most important truths hide in ordinary places. The valley stretched wide before her, no longer empty, just full of different things. Tom's off-key song. The smell of bread rising for tomorrow. Gideon's distant hammer ring as he mended a loose post. Her land, her people, her life earned through winter and flour and the simple stubborn refusal to be less than she was. Silas Pritchard's store had been sold to pay his debts. A new family ran it now, fair weights, honest ledgers, no threats hidden in smiles. The valley was learning to trust again. Nell went inside as darkness fell, lit the lamps one by one, and began mixing dough for morning bread. Her hands moved with her father's rhythm, sure and practiced. Outside, spring deepened into the promise of summer. Inside, the stove glowed warm. She was enough, had always been enough. The prairie had simply needed time to see it. Spring came slow that year, the way it does in high country, reluctant, testing, finally sure. Nell Crowder stood at her cabin door, watching Tom split kindling with the easy rhythm of a boy who'd found home. Gideon rode the fence line, checking posts they'd set together when the ground thawed. The extra 40 acres stretched green and possible under the wide Montana sky. The bread oven sat quiet now, waiting for Sunday when the whole valley would gather again. Pastor Moss had made it tradition, community breaking bread together, first Sunday of each month. Nell baked, others brought what they could. The meals weren't about hunger anymore, they were about memory, about the day they'd all stood together and chosen truth over comfort. Silas Pritchard's name had faded from conversation like smoke. He'd been tried in Helena, sentenced to 5 years for fraud. His store stood empty for a month before a young couple from Denver bought it. They painted the sign, replaced the crooked shelves, and started over. The valley was learning what fair weights felt like. Nell's father's recipe book sat on the kitchen shelf, its pages open to the entry that had saved her. 1864, Crowder Creek Survey, need 12 minutes. She'd traced those words 100 times, marveling at how he'd hidden a map to her future between measurements for bread. Tom came running across the yard, waving a letter. "Miss Nell, mail came. It's from Widow Kearney." She'd moved to live with her daughter in Butte, but wrote every week. Her letters were tart and warm, full of advice Nell didn't always need but always welcomed. Gideon returned at dusk, horse steaming, his face quiet with satisfaction. They ate supper together, the three of them, while lamplight turned the cabin golden. Not a family born of blood, but family nonetheless. That night, Nell stood at the window looking out at stars scattered like wheat across black fields. The land was still hard, the wind still cut, but her claim was hers, legally, fully, undeniably hers. She'd survived winter not by becoming harder, but by remaining exactly who she was. Soft where the world wanted stone, generous where it demanded nothing, present where others had fled. She lit the stove for tomorrow's bread, the dough already rising under cloth on the counter. Her hands moved with remembered rhythm, her father's teaching, her husband's memory, her own hard-won knowledge braided together. The prairie stretched wide beyond her door, no longer empty, just full of all the things that mattered.